show big picture science and has written many hundreds, probably thousands, of popular articles on astronomy and SETI. The title of his talk is Earth being visited by aliens?
Okay. I was told to give this talk in Bulgarian. My Bulgarian isn't up to snuff. I won't do that. Let me just put my watch down here. Have to be done by 5:30, is that right? Okay, I'm just gonna, look, since I didn't know the tenor of this session, I just prepared a few thoughts here about aliens in general. I don't know how many of you have problems with aliens in your personal lives, but surveys have shown that 60%, more than 60%, of the American public believes that aliens are out there. Well, that's good news, and not even very radical. But a similar percentage believes that they're also here on Earth, occasionally hauling people out of their bedrooms for those unauthorized experiments you keep hoping will happen to you. So there's this fascination with aliens. Hollywood loves aliens. I think that they love aliens simply because aliens being so unspecified, because we know really nothing about what real aliens might be like, the Hollywood people can make them to be any way they like them to be, and useful for the script. They can have them flatten Milpitas if the script calls for that, and many people think that would be a good idea. Okay, so let me just tell you just a few facts about aliens that might be useful. On your next bus trip, you can regale the person sitting next to you for these things. Why do we think they're out there? Why do we actually believe that there are aliens out there, aside from their frequent appearance on movies and television? Well, I mean, part of it's just a statistical argument. There are something like 1 trillion planets in our galaxy, and if you don't find that an adequate sample size, we can photograph about 200 billion other galaxies, each with 1 trillion planets. So there's all this real estate. It would be really remarkable if it were all sterile. That would make you very special. And of course, most of you think you are special. That's the fault of your mothers. But in fact, in science, if you think you're special, you're usually wrong. 1 out of every 3 sun-like stars, this is a fairly recent result actually, has an Earth-sized world in orbit around it. Okay, it doesn't mean that there are inhabitants on that world, or cities, or anything, that sort of thing, but again, there's a lot of real estate, and much of it seems to be salubrious real estate, the kind where you might cook up some life. And the other thing about life is that on Earth, life began very early. I don't know how many of you remember the first life on Earth. I do, but it appeared more than 3.5 billion years ago. And the Earth only cooled to the point where it could support any biology about 4 billion years ago. So what that's saying is that as soon as the Earth was amenable to life, bam, there was life, which sounds like it wasn't very hard to get started, because it got started right away. Now, let me give you another number here. We don't know if there's any life out here. We've never found any life beyond Earth. I suppose most of you know that. Not even bacteria, but I think that will change fairly soon now. But we haven't found any life, and it's still possible to argue without an ironclad rebuttal that Earth is the only place where life began, let alone the only place where intelligence began. People usually respond to that by saying, well, what do you mean by intelligence, right? Is there intelligence in San Jose? Well, in the SETI business, we have an operational definition of intelligence, because we're looking for signals, radio signals, flashing lasers, stuff like that. And so our definition of intelligence is, if you can build a radio transmitter, you're intelligent. That's it. Okay, so you might, nudge the person sitting next to you and ask them if they can build a radio transmitter. You know how to treat them for the rest of this conference. Okay, all that aside, obviously I think that there are aliens out there, and if not, we're very, very, very special, which in science is always a dangerous point of view. But could we find them, right? And if you watch a lot of TV or movies where aliens appear, again, that's very frequent, mainly because they can be as evil as you want them to be. Could we find them? Well, there are various possibilities. The most obvious one is that we just get in a rocket, put the pedal to the metal, and go find them. That's what they do on Star Trek, after all. Now, our rockets move at about 7 miles a second, which is, as I say, great if you're going to, I don't know, Fremont. But, again, not clear why you'd want to do that. But it's not good enough for going to the stars. It's okay, it's adequate if you're going to the moon or Mars or really any place in our solar system. You can get there before you die. But that's not true if you're going to other places in the nearby cosmos. To get to the nearest other star at that speed would take 75,000 years or something like that. So that's a long time to be sitting there, eating frozen food. So we're not going to the stars anytime soon. In fact, it's not even clear we'll ever go to the stars, despite all the science fiction you've read, simply because of the distances involved. You might say, well, just build faster rockets. Well, of course you can build faster rockets, but a faster rocket requires more energy. And if you just work out, and this is, junior high school physics, just work out the amount of energy required to send a rocket to a nearby star, and that gets there before your history, right? It's an enormous amount of energy. It's comparable to the amount of energy that the United States uses in centuries worth of existence. And that's a very expensive fuel bill. So it's unclear we'll actually ever do that. But that doesn't mean we can't get in touch, because obviously there might be radio waves going through this room as you sit here listening to my soporific presentation from aliens, right? That could be. And we can't rule it out because we haven't done adequate searching for such signals. It's not easy, and one of the hardest things about it is funding. Who's going to pay for it? Okay, let me just move on a little bit to another way you might find the aliens. I mention this only because I think it's actually an underrated approach. Rather than trying to pick them up on the radio or look for flashing lasers and stuff like that, you might look for artifacts. You might look for alien constructions. Keep in mind that the universe is now 3 times older than the Earth, right? I was around for the beginning of the Earth. That was 4.5 billion years ago. But the universe has been, the Big Bang was like 13 or 14 billion years ago. So the universe has been around for many billions of years longer than this neighborhood. And that means that unless life is something very improbable, or intelligence is very improbable, then we're the new kids on the block. And most of the aliens that are out there are going to be more advanced than we are. And on average, by billions of years, more advanced. So, the kind of thing you see in science fiction, when we find the aliens and we interact with them the way we would interact with somebody from Cleveland or something, that's not very reasonable. They're way beyond us. It would be like, a better analogy would be to say, how do ants interact with you? Right? There's a big difference there. What would be the consequence of finding the aliens? Well, the two that I'll mention here. To begin with, we would know that we're not a miracle. That might be interesting to know that we're, just fairly typical or ordinary, or at least not rare. And the other possibility is that we may learn something. If we could ever understand an alien signal, and I have to say that's a small industry of people who find it interesting to worry about how you might decode a message from an alien society. I think maybe you could do it. You could do it if they want you to do it, put it that way. If they could sort of put the message into a form that would be easy enough for us to decode. That's possible. Anti-cryptography, I guess you could call it. And if they've done that, maybe you could learn something. And again, the ones you're likely to find are going to be way ahead of us. So maybe, you learn some interesting stuff like, I don't know, the cure for death, or how to win the lottery or something. Okay, finally, some predictions just to provoke you further. I've done this frequently now for maybe a decade. I bet everybody in the audience that will find ET within a short period of time. My short period of time these days is 20 years. That's shorter than it used to be. That we will find evidence for aliens within 20 years, and I'll bet you a cup of Starbucks on that. So either we find them, which will give you something to talk to people at dinner tonight, if people do have dinner with you, or you get a cup of coffee, so you really can't lose. Now, how does this tie into a skeptics conference? Well, probably not very well, but I might just say that it does. There is some sort of the public's attitude about aliens that might be relevant to the skeptics community. There's this distrust of science that leads to this. Polls show, there are many polls on this, but they almost all come up with the same result, and that is that the majority of Americans believe that not only are the aliens out there, but they're here, and the federal government is keeping that news from you. Now, when I encounter people like this, the first thing I ask them is, well, why is the government keeping that secret? And their answer is always the same answer. It's because the public couldn't handle the news.
Right.
Right. So ask yourself, or ask anybody, suppose you were to read in the papers tomorrow, if you know what a paper is, you'd read in the papers tomorrow that, aliens have been found in space, or more than that. Maybe they've been stacked up and cataloged in some secret place in New Mexico or something. If you read that, would you say, well, that's it, Marge? That's it, Marge. I'm not going to go to work today. I'm just going to riot in the streets. Is that what you would do? Probably not. Most people would not do that. They would just say, well, that's interesting, and they would turn to the sports section. So I think that the public has been exposed to the idea of aliens for so long that if we were actually to find them, they would find it very interesting, and they would want to know, well, what are they saying, or stuff like that. Should we say anything back to them? Those kind of sort of practical questions, but they wouldn't riot in the streets about that. And the other thing is that I think that would be an inflection point for human society to finally find out that we're not the only kids on the block. And I suspect that human history would thereafter be sort of bifurcated into history before we learned that we weren't alone, and history after we learned we were not alone. Okay, I think I've prattled on here long enough. I don't know if I still have time for any questions, do I? Okay, so ask all questions. You can ask them in both directions. I don't know how many of you were still conscious, but...
Oh.
I think that again, I'm a layperson, I'm not a trained scientist, but I think that the common factor here amongst the pseudoscience and the placebos and the fear or the concerns about are we alone, or the questions about that, is math. Math as in arithmetic, numbers. Big numbers and small numbers are rather hard for the average American to grasp. Balancing the checkbook, or understanding what it means that the closest star is 4 million light years away. Is that?
No, the closest stars are much closer.
Four light years again. So that, to comprehend those distances, and what would it take us to travel that distance, and so I'm just trying to say that the understanding of, you said that the intelligence is being able to create radios. So that being able to create radios is just a fraction of the human history. And we've been, like I said, we've only been around for this long as far as a civilized, educated creatures. So likewise, how much does that portion of our ability to communicate with extraterrestrial intelligence overlap with other populations, extraterrestrial?
Yeah, most of that doesn't come up in my conversations, but your last point is a very valid point. That is, could it be that our society doesn't overlap with anybody else's society? Overlap in the sense that, the time for them to send a signal is not longer than the time that either they or we are here, so that we could communicate. Well, that depends on how many such societies there are, right? That's all it depends on. And not all, it depends on. It also depends on the lifetime of a technologically competent society, right? You invent radio, so now you can go on the air, now you can listen for other societies, but how long do you keep radio? It may be a general phenomenon that you invent radio and then very shortly thereafter you invent the bomb, and so then you go off the air, right? And this may be a general phenomenon. I mean, it's, there's nothing particularly homocentric about any of that. So if that's the general phenomenon, maybe there's nobody to talk to because they're all glowing in the dark. Could be. That's kind of pessimistic, though.
Yeah, two questions. First one is, 60 Minutes had an article about
these phenomena that the pilots, the military pilots are seeing and stuff like that. And the second one is how's SETI doing?
Yeah, well, what's the question in the first observation?
Okay, first one, apparently 60 Minutes had this thing with these pilots.
Yeah, I know the story, but what's the question?
The second question is, how
No,
is SETI?
no, what's the first question?
What's your answer? What's your answer
Oh,
to that?
okay, all right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, well, I mean, yes, the military pilots see these. I have to say, I'm on a lot of radio and TV shows, and they always say, look, these pilots, these are trained pilots, and they've seen things in the sky, and that these things in the sky are making maneuvers that, you know, none of our aircraft could make, that kind of thing. But that's wrong on many counts. To begin with, pilots are trained to see other aircraft. They're not trained to see aliens, or not even alien aircraft. So you know, you guys know this, witness testimony is about the worst kind of evidence there is. So that wouldn't work. I would believe it if, in fact, all the hardware we have that's looking at the sky, not for aliens, of course, but for defense purposes, if some of that would routinely find alien spacecraft, right? It doesn't. You might look up Avi Loeb at Harvard. He discusses this. I think he's more sympathetic to the idea that we're being visited by aliens. That would be great. That would be great if they are visiting us. I mean, that's a big story. But maybe the good news is they don't do anything horrible, right? They don't kill people. They don't interfere with traffic on 101. They're just here, right? Occasionally hauling you out of your bedroom for that experiment that your mom didn't approve of. I mean, that's at least improving some people's social life. So I figure that's not so bad. That's the worst they're doing. I don't know if I answered your question. I'm not even sure I said anything that was relevant to the domain of your question.
The question is, how is SETI doing?
How is SETI doing? Fine. Last I knew, which was yesterday. Yeah. SETI is actually, for those of you who don't know, the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. We use big radio antennas to try and eavesdrop on signals. And it's not funded by the government. When I first joined the SETI Institute, there was a NASA program, but there was a senator from Nevada, kind of ironic, not Nevada, who killed that program, and it's never been reinstated, really. So it's all privately funded. Yep. I don't know what the microphone guy, there's somebody. Oh.
Jay.
Wake up, Jay.
The microphone guy.
So I have a question about what you say earlier in your talk. And you say that because it takes huge amount of fuel to travel to another planet, it's very unlikely that alien will visit us. And you say it takes like several centuries of energy that American consumed in order to send to get from here to another planet. Is that correct?
Well, not to another planet. Keep in mind, I'm talking about extra solar system planets, planets around other stars. We know there are no aliens in our solar system. I mean, there may be life, probably bacterial, but we don't know of any aliens here. But there may be aliens around the, you know, what is it? It's on the order of a couple of 100 billion stars just in our galaxy, right? And most of them, almost all of them, have solar systems. We know that. It doesn't mean that there's a lot of life there, or even intelligent life. But we're not going to visit them. We certainly are not going to visit them. Our rockets don't go nearly fast enough to do that. It would be like saying I'm going to vacation in Nevada, but I'm not going to get there any faster than an ant would get there, or something like that. So we're not going to visit them. Now, they may have better technology, and maybe conceivably they would come here. But that strikes me as kind of silly. Why would they come here when they can just build big antennas and watch our television and learn all they want to know about us?
Any other questions?
Just speaking to the pilots, trained pilots seeing spacecraft, there was somebody who trained the trained pilots to use their infrared cameras. And I saw a video of him trying to weigh in on that controversy that when there was somebody appearing in front of a congressional committee, you know, 3 guys, and you know, they were pilots. But the fellow who is training the trained pilots made statements that indicate that he doesn't really understand how camera lenses work. So it's not perfect training.
Maybe he doesn't need to understand how the camera optics work as long as they got a good contractor building them. But I just think that if we were being visited, if there were really alien craft buzzing our airspace, to begin with, our airspace is actually fairly heavily monitored by the military because they're interested not in aliens, but they're interested in, for example, Russian spacecraft that might be coming our way with evil intent. So that is very heavily monitored. There's also, in addition to the, I don't know how many hundreds of satellites that are in orbit, whose job it is to look at the Earth, in other words, to look down. You know, we also have cameras on the ground that are looking up, and those things are very accurate. I mean, I looked up what they could see, and they could see a softball in orbit, right? So they can see very small stuff. If we were being visited, believe me, you would know. And when I talk to the public about this, they often say, "Oh well, yeah, but you know the government would cover it up." And you know, okay, maybe you believe our government is capable of covering it up. I used to work for the federal government. I grew up in the D.C. area. And I was never impressed with their ability to keep anything secret. I mean, they didn't keep Anita Hill very secret for very long. But, yes, if the audience doesn't groan at least twice during one of my classes, I think it's not very interesting. Anyhow, I just don't believe the people who think there's some sort of conspiracy involved. Yeah, behind you, had asked a question.
Yeah. So one question I had was like, are we not limiting ourselves when we look for alien life to how it is on Earth, right? Because life on other, whatever we call life, might take other forms and might be based on other mechanisms besides what we have on Earth.
Okay, I'm not sure what the question is, but I assume it's you're just pointing out the fact that their life may not be the same as our life, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Well, I don't imagine it would be terribly like the life on Earth, except it is, of course, on television all the time. But that's because you can relate to something that looks like your next door neighbor, right? But, you know, to say that their biology is going to be completely different, it's not going to be carbon-based life forms, as Spock always said to Captain Kirk, carbon-based life forms. Oh, okay, well, I'm glad it's not molybdenum-based life forms. You know, so, look, carbon-based life forms is not just a trope of science fiction. You know, you learn a little organic chemistry and you realize, well, carbon actually, you know, likes to hook up with other molecules, or other atoms, and in particular with other carbon atoms to make very complicated molecules. And that's what you are, right? Complicated molecules. I mean, most people, when they wake up in the morning, well, another day of organic chemistry. I mean, you know, that's what you are, and that's what they would be. And so, you know, it's not totally improbable that they'll be carbon-based. Somebody's got to cut me off here, because otherwise I'll go through next Wednesday.
One more question.
Quick question. A couple minutes ago, you mentioned that instead of flying here through space, they could just tune into watch our TV. My question is, how realistic is that? For example, if I have security cameras outside my house or a dash cam, it's kind of difficult to get a really good picture of that you could actually read the license plates. You know, if a car is a block away. So I mean, some people, I've seen people say, "Can you please enlarge this? Because this car hit me and a block away. I took a picture of his, but I can't read license plate." So, how realistic is that to be able to think that someone in one of the closer solar systems could actually understand those TV radio signals from Earth?
Yeah. Well, understanding them, I mean, understanding a TV show. I'm not sure I understand them, but you know, to detect them. It turns out that it's not very difficult at all. In fact, if you're among the nearest 100 or even 1,000 stars, right, you're on one of those stellar systems, you could pick up our television with an antenna that would fit on the parking lot of this building. So it's not all that hard. It turns out that radio technology, which is what this is, of course, is extremely sensitive. And that's just because that's a consequence of the physics. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.